murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
You're tapped in, so let's get right to it. So, Burkina Faso's in the news again, and President Ibrahim Traore is again doing battle with the West. This time it's the United Nations, though. It's not your typical Western country trying to find an end or a way back into one of the 3, 4, maybe 5 Sahel states that kicked them out in recent time, all right? This concerns the United Nations, all right? Let me walk you through this. Back in February 2026, United Nations Rights Chief Volker Turk put out a press release calling on Burkina Faso authorities to halt the rapid closure of civic space and to overturn the plan to ban all political parties. This was in, again, February 2026. Burkina Faso's response, the authorities there, Captain Ibrahim Traore, suspended the office operations over that press release. Now, Foreign Minister Karamoko Jean-Marie Traore accused international organizations of behaving like super police and said they had overstepped the country's sovereignty. Months of talk went nowhere, so the United Nations Human Rights Office announced it would permanently close its country office by November 30, 2026. Turk said he deeply regretted the suspension and that continued engagement had failed to resolve the matter. And then I have to say, here they are again, United Nations. Oh, wow. This is a puppet organization, plain and simple. You mean to tell me that you guys are focusing on and trying to create havoc or get in the business of a sovereign nation trying to get its feet under itself after removing neo-colonists or colonizers from the region in ways that make a lot of sense? You remove the colonizers, then you stop the theft of the resources in the country. They've done all that. And not only that, they said, we know what the problem is here in the Sahel states, especially those 3 AES countries. It also has to do with the political foundation or formation of what Westerners call democracy. So Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger all said, you know what, we're going to discontinue this political apparatus because it doesn't serve us. It works for the West, but it cannot and it does not work for the Sahel states. And so that's what they did. They eliminated democracy in terms of how the United States, the West, call it or say it should be ran. And they also banned all political parties, put it like that, all right? Because that's exactly what they did. Now, when they did this, United Nations, United States, France, they were all up in arms. There was a lot of talk about, we may have to go in there because, this creates a security risk for not just us, the West, but surrounding countries. Like what? Make that make sense, A country, a sovereign country saying, we don't want this system of politics, this democracy. It hasn't worked for Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger. In fact, it hasn't worked for anybody, people of color especially, who utilizes it. So they got rid of it. And the West went crazy, all right? They sent their lapdog, the United Nations, to talk a lot of crap. And again, here is the United Nations trying to check someone, police someone. All the while, you have what's going on in Palestine unchecked. This is going on unchecked. It's unfettered. They're doing absolutely nothing about that. But then you want to attempt to show your claws, bring out your talons when we're talking about an African country saying, We want no more of this westernized democracy. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Anyway, that's what was said by the Traore government. They said, hey, look, you people are acting like super police, and we're not having it. We're not having it. In fact, you've overstepped your bounds so much, we got to shut you down. And that's exactly what they did. All right, so months of talks went nowhere, so the United Nations Human Rights Office announced it would permanently close its doors, its country's office by November 30th, 2026. Turk said he deeply regretted the suspension and that continued engagement had failed to resolve the matter. For them, the Burkina Faso government, the Mali and the Niger government, that matter was solved. They decided. So it was no longer an issue with them. All right. Now, we need to understand this isn't isolated. All right. Not in the least. The government had already shut down 118 civil society organizations, so-called focused on human rights work before this closure occurred. All right. Ain't that something? So anyway, look, I think what they're trying to do is demolish, wreck, or prevent Traore's economic bridge from completing itself or from being complete. All right. This is what we think they're attempting to do. And this is why we see this economic and information war occurring now. You know, we were just talking yesterday about what's going on over there. I mean, here this country is freeing itself from French dependency. And as a result, you have an uptick in jihadist or terrorist activity in the region. So they're dealing with that war. They're dealing with the war of poverty. They're dealing with the war of a lack of infrastructure, productivity, things of that nature. France been over there for decades. Done absolutely nothing for the country while it pillaged its resources. Sent them all back to France. France ate well. The Burkina people suffered as a result, though. So here they are. They're saying, hey, you know what? We're done with that. And the West is saying, and they're getting the United Nations, they're employing them to say, you know what? Well, we're going to create this economic and informational war against you guys since you don't want to toe the queue. And Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger say, come on with it. Come on with it. We're prepared for this. And this is what we see playing out. So anyway, here it is 2 years later. This is the 2-year anniversary of the formation and execution of the AES, the Allegiance of the Sahel States, all right? They're doing great. They're doing impossible things, and I say impossible things because that's what they were told they would be. Impossible to do. They're doing them, all right? So we're on the 2-year anniversary, and all anyone has to do is look at what has been accomplished, you know, especially as is this unification, the AES has what they've done together as a unit, and not counting everything they've done since they come into power. All right, this is what we should be looking at. But we're at that 2-year anniversary, all right, and this is what they get from the West as a result of this economic and information war. All right, and again, take into consideration as well, out of all 3 of the AES states, Captain IBRAHIMTRAORE has had numerous, over 12 assassination attempts on his life. And I think that they realize, okay, that's not going to work. We can't get that done. We can't find a way to make that happen. Let's try this other tactic. Now we're seeing what the other tactic we think is or was the jihadists and terrorists, you know, going into, you know, towns outside of the region, you know, the center of Burkina Faso, and starting havoc, killing people, you know. That was that part. That's not working because they're being chased out. So now it's, okay, we have to create an economic and informational war to stop them. That's the third phase. I can't tell you what the fourth will be, because I'm pretty sure there's a fourth phase, or phase number 4, because 3 is not going to work either. The proof is in the pudding. What's being accomplished over there speaks for itself. No one in their right mind, well, there's no narrative or propaganda that can dispel or deny what we see taking place in the AES states, in the Sahel. Nothing can deny that, So that's what they're up against. Anyway, United Nations closure is the case study, especially the case study that he's talking about. And we're talking about, again, Captain IBRAHIMTRAORE. Now, I'm not just going to sit here and recite the United Nations framing, all right, in terms of what they got, what they're up to. We're going to go a little further than that, because, that's the Western press's version, them saying, oh, well, we went over there and they had what we call these violations, or these civil issues, human rights issues occurring over there. We don't have to, frame that. We pretty much know how that goes, all right? But what we will talk about is what Burkina Faso is not saying, but what it's doing. Again, in the face of all that's going on around them, what they're accomplishing rather than what they're saying. This is not a Donald Trump moment. Trump says a whole lot of nothing. Wow, a whole lot of nothing is done. This is totally different. These countries are doing more than they are saying or what they're saying they're going to do. All right, that's a fact. All right. All right, so listen, I want to sit right next to their version of it. This Burkina Faso is a sovereign government. It's proved that just based on what they've accomplished. Without the West's help, without the help of the EU, France, United States, UK, IMF, and or World Bank. This is what they've accomplished on their own. That's sovereignty. That's sovereignty. That's independence. Can't argue with that. You just can't. A sovereign government, saying an international body stepped outside a signed host country agreement to interfere in domestic governance and got shut the duck down, all right? They got shut down. That's sovereignty. That's a government that is sure of itself and is so sure of itself that it does not have to answer to anything outside its own sovereignty or independence. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So you guys weigh on that. Let that weigh on you. There are two stories here. One is a lot of rhetoric, a lot of words. The other is action, things that are tangible, that can be readily seen occurring or have occurred. All right? Just think about that. Now, the United Nations, again, it put out that press release and it said all those things. It was telling Burkina Faso how to run their own country, how to act or run their own civic space. Burkina Faso said, nah, that's not your place. That's not even your lane. That's a violation. That's a ticket. This is a citation. Pull you over, take the keys, and it shut that office down. That's what happened. That's what happened. So the spiel or the narrative from the United Nations, Turk over in the United Nations said, well, they basically didn't want to listen to what we had to say. We could get no agreement from them. That's a great sign of sovereignty right there. If you ask me, that's the sign of someone saying, what I need to listen to you about mine, about what I have or what we have going on in our country, something that you didn't have any interest in when the French was here. committing whatever it was they were committing, doing whatever it was they weren't doing while they were pillaging the resources of the country. Oh my, shut them down. They shut the whole thing down. Burkina Faso did. Don't think for a minute that the United Nations willingly went and shut its own doors to its office. No, that's not how they work. That'd be like NGOs or any non-governmental organization just up and say, okay, we're going to close our doors because we don't agree with it. No, that ain't how that works. They would never do that. That only occurs when the government that knows it's sovereign, that knows its independence, goes in and say, we're locking everything up in here. You're staying and leaving. It's time to go. That's how that works. In other words, they get the boot. Boot. Kick them right out. United Nations was no different than France, the UK, or the US, or all the NGOs, including Bill Gates. That's sovereignty at work. That's sovereignty at work. Now, the United Nations calling it a human rights failure. That's what they, again, propaganda, false narratives, and, creating these lies, They called it a human rights failure. What about when the jihadists and the terrorists were running through the countryside, killing villages, whole villages? While the French military sat there and did nothing. What was that? What was that? Burkina Faso's calling it sovereignty. That's what they're calling it. That's what anybody should call it in their right minds. This is a sovereign nation, independent of the mandates, rules, and regulations of other countries who call themselves sovereign. Imagine that. But again, a lot of people want to look at a same event, two completely different stories. All right, go right ahead. But I tell you, that right there is the information war that Traore's been talking about, telling people about, in terms of what he's had to put up with, dealing with these people. Yeah, he ended democracy because he stated flatly and out loud, it doesn't serve Burkina Faso. It doesn't serve our people. That's a Western idea, concept. It should stay in the West. The way they run that, that's cool. We have no problems with that. We're not going to go into France, anywhere in the European Union, United Kingdom, or the United States and tell them your form of democracy is no good. We don't like it, change it. You have to do it this way, or there's going to be a problem. They're not thinking of it like that. That's not what they're dealing with. They're talking about being independent of their own affairs, being sovereign in terms of how they deal with their own affairs and their people. Super police. Yeah, they called it right. And to give this thing a little more context, I have a clip. I want to drop this clip for you guys. It's going to give us a little more oversight or, understanding in terms of what occurred. We can always use a little more information, right? That way we can, shift through what we tend to think is the truth as opposed to what's a lie or propaganda, all right? That being said, I'm going to bring this clip in. Before I do, as always, you are tapped in. This is the Art of Political Discourse. We appreciate your participation and viewership. Please like, share, follow, comment, of course, and subscribe, all right? Let's get to this clip. Courtesy of African 24 Hours News, all right?
The United Nations Human Rights Office has announced that it will permanently close its country office in Burkina Faso in November.
And now again, this is United Nations saying this is what we're going to do. We're going to close rather than tell the truth. President Traore said, it's time for you guys to go. You are interfering with our sovereignty.
But 30, 2026, bringing an end to its presence in the country after months of diplomatic efforts failed to resolve a dispute with the government.
Now you read that tape there, the ticker there. United Nations Human Rights Office forced to shut down in Burkina Faso after talks with Traore government collapse. So what that means then is the Burkina Faso government wasn't feeling nothing what they were talking about. They probably saw it as another means to attack the Burkina Faso government or to weaken it in ways or such a way to where before you know it, the United Nations makes a statement, and before you know that, you got uniform in there, unifor in Burkina Faso again. You got the French back. You got the US. You got the UK, you know, the EU. Okay, we're going to nip this thing in the bud. Time to go. We're going to lock the doors. Now, you coming or you staying? Because you'll be in there. That's what happened.
The decision follows the suspension of the UN Human Rights Office operations by the government of Captain IBRAHIMTRAORE in April 2026. The move came after the UN issued a statement expressing concern over the shrinking civic space in Burkina Faso, including allegations of restrictions on fundamental freedoms and broader human rights issues.
Now and again, those issues that they're trying to bring into question was first the fact that the Burkina Faso government taking steps to eradicate, dismantle, get rid of Western democracy. That's what started all this. Burkina Faso decided that Western democracy did not fit within the framework of the Burkina Bay people. They went even further and said, you know what? We understand that what we have going on here in our country is a war. It's not a civil war, but it is a war for control of the country. And most of those who are fighting this war are proxies. Then you have another segment who are actually really fighting to get control of the country in order to establish Sharia law. But rather than, and keep in mind, people, Captain IBRAHIMTRAORE is a Muslim, a practicing Muslim. But rather than allow that to happen, because he understands the Burkina Bay people aren't just Muslims. There's a wide variety of faiths and religions of those who reside and call themselves Burkina Bay. So he established a secular government that would not be ran and determined by Sharia law, but by a type of government that represents all people, all faiths and religions. That's simple. That's simple. This is how the West work, though. You listen to them long enough, they'll convince you of a lie. They'll do that, and they'll do it so well that you wouldn't know the truth if it slaps you in the face.
Burkina Faso authorities rejected a statement describing it as unacceptable and accusing the UN of interfering in the country's internal affairs. The government subsequently suspended the office activities, triggering months of negotiations aimed at restoring its operations. Despite repeated discussions between UN officials and the authorities in Ouagadougou, both sides were unable to reach an agreement. The Human Rights Office has now confirmed that its country office will permanently cease operations on November 30, 2026. The closure marks a significant setback for international human rights engagement in Burkina Faso, where security challenges linked to extremist violence have continued to worsen in recent years. Human rights organizations have repeatedly raised concerns over the impact of the conflict on civilians, including allegations of abuses by both armed groups and security forces. The development also reflects the increasingly strained relationship between Burkina Faso's military-led government and several international partners. Since Captain IBRAHIMTRAORE came to power, the country has adopted a more assertive stance toward foreign institutions, while emphasizing national sovereignty and reducing external influence. The closure of the UN Human Rights Office is expected to have wider implications for international monitoring of the human rights situation in Burkina Faso and may further deepen concern among global rights advocates about the country's civic and political environment.
All right. I just, I find that odd that the United Nations would come out in the open like that and have a press release that speaks the way it did, because the Burkina Faso's president would not agree to what their terms or understanding or desires for human rights to look like. I'm willing to wager even when dealing with captured terrorists or jihadists, there's a certain treatment given to them, as well as should be. I'm not saying, I'm not, alleging anything. I'm just speaking out loud about, in my mind, what it would be about if I knew this was going on and I'm trying to do something for my country and my people, and then I have these people coming in here, these, they're not even Burkina Bay people, coming in from all parts of the world as well as Africa to try to disrupt what we're building for the people. I wouldn't treat them with a modicum of respect. They would get very little. They would get very little, because these are the same people roaming along the countryside, killing villagers, allegedly kidnapping women, things of that nature, killing those who serve the government, want to create a better society for its people. They wouldn't get any love. They shouldn't. They shouldn't, and again, you have to tip your hat to IBRAHIMTRAORE in terms of how he sees the political apparatus of democracy. He sees it as a detriment to his country and his people. It is because they came in talking about democracy and a whole lot of other things that they're in this position they're in to begin with. You got to give the man credit. This government is setting out to do what it's supposed to do for the improvement, the empowerment, and the betterment of its country and people. We salute President IBRAHIMTRAORE, and may the ancestors look over him and guide him as they have been. That would also go for Goita and Tichini, Mali and Niger, and all those other countries who are vying, who are actually not begging. I'm not going to say begging, but and I'm not going to say desperate, but they are seeking entrance into the AES. There's a shift happening in the Sahel. France knows it. United States knows it. The EU knows it. The world sees it. They're trying to stop that shift. So long live President IBRAHIMTRAORE and all his brothers and sisters who got his back and support him. That that support being based upon what he's bringing finally to parts of Africa that have never seen this type of change, evolution, and progress. All right? Let us know what you think. Tell us your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. Do you think this was the right move for Traore to shut down the United Nations? A very, very ineffectual United Nations, I might add. Very ineffectual. Was that wise? Or by shutting down the UN, will that come back to haunt him? Or was it a good move? Let us know what you think, okay? Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.